Welcome to another episode of The How. I'm Francesca Pick, founding partner at Greater Than. In this conversation, I talk to Jaya Brekke, PhD, working at the intersection of politics, culture, and economics, especially in the context of blockchain and Web3. This conversation is a little bit more technologically focused, given that Jaya has been working for very many years, since its beginnings really, in the Web3 space. We look a little bit about what were some of the potentials and hopes that this technology might bring in addressing societal challenges, but where are we today and what has really happened? And based on those insights, what do we actually do now? Jaya today works in a Web3 startup called Nym, where she's in the leadership team, where they work on privacy. And so we talk about why she's chosen to spend her time working on this topic and why it's so essential for the future of how our technology develops. And we also look a little bit at her in the second half of the conversation. We look at her journey as a leader, especially being someone who comes from quite anarchist roots and really identifies with that persona. What does it look like to be in a leadership team, to be running a team, and to actually then connect those values and ways of working with how you work together. So it's a really interesting conversation where we really do quite a big arc from more of the meta, looking at society as a whole and the role of technology in that, to then the much more personal and looking at leadership and development. I really enjoyed the conversation and I hope you do too. Yeah. Okay. So welcome everybody to our next episode of The How. I'm Francesca, and I'm really excited to be here today with Jaya, who I met many years ago. And she works at a very interesting intersection of politics, culture, economy, and has been working on her PhD, which she completed a few years ago, I think. That's actually how we initially got connected, and I'm super excited to hear more about her journey, all of the different topics that she's touched on, and especially some of the work that we've connected around in the Web3 and blockchain space, and how that connects with more of a macro vision of the world and politics and economics and how that all intersects. And actually we reconnected because she's now working for the first time in a company, which seems to be a pretty unusual role for you to be in, from my understanding.
Yes.
And so that's also surely brought up some interesting things. So welcome, Jaya.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to cut there for a second because I just have a small worry. Do you know if Zoom it does screen recordings? Or is it like just records internally in the app? Because I'm just gonna shut because they have this chat that keeps popping up.
Oh.
Let me just shut down. I'll just shut down all
I
my
don't
chats.
think it does. Here, wait. I'm just gonna pause it.
Yeah.
I didn't pause it quickly enough here. I think it's cool. Welcome, Jaya.
Thanks
so
very
it would
much.
be great to just hear a few more words about yourself before we dive in deeper.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I finished the PhD that you mentioned about 5 years ago now, so quite some time. It might have been the very first social science PhD that was looking at the topic of blockchain technology. Not quite sure. I have to kind of trawl back and see, but I think it might be. I was basically trying to understand what the kind of politics of this new technology was. So it seemed to be a technology that was um, curiously more concerned with politics than most other tech that kind of comes about. You know, it wasn't really concerned with engineering questions or performance questions or efficiency questions, things that normally, you know, tech tries to address. But it was really trying to like solve this problem of politics, which, you know, made me very curious to also understand, well, what was, you know, the proposed solution really about, and what was the kind of inherent political assumptions within that solution. So Um, so yeah, I analyzed Bitcoin and Ethereum protocols, very, very early days. Ethereum only just came about, in fact, in the first year of my PhD. So this was back in 2016. And then, yeah, after that, went on to do a postdoc that was more specifically on the political economies of what I was calling kind of hacker engineers. So thinking through this unique way that engineers go about thinking about politics and economics also, and the creation of markets. This was the creation of markets for very different purposes than what we normally understand markets to do in traditional economics. Um, and after that, decided that I needed to get my hands a bit more messy and joined a company, for better or for worse. But it was one of the few companies that I felt was doing something where this core concept in blockchain technology of decentralization really made sense, at both a technical and a political level. So yeah, my current position is a chief strategy officer at a company called Nym. We're creating a decentralized privacy network that effectively is seeking to address a problem in the core protocols of the internet, really. That makes, yeah, to secure traffic routing effectively. So when you communicate across the internet, someone can't watch everything that you're doing. That's what we do, very, very briefly put.
Yeah, I'm sure that's very much the synthesis. But yeah, super exciting and super important work. So before we dive in deeper, just want to do this brief little ritual, which is what I call like making explicit the relational fabric between us. Because everyone that I'm talking to here, there's different types of personal and work connections that are there. And I think it's interesting to just, yeah, show how these come about. So I just thought we could briefly remember together how did we meet and like what are some of the those milestones been? Because I think my memory is I feel like maybe it was 2016 when we first met, when I was organizing the We Share Fest, the big conference about the sharing economy in Paris, and I feel like we connected there about the topic of blockchain and politics, like sometime around then. Um, is that what you recall?
That probably makes sense. I remember the We Share Fest. I was doing a lot of events at the time. Um, I can't, to be honest, honestly can't remember the first time we met. That is probably the first time we met. I do remember the main thing that we did together though, which was
Yes.
write a paper, which that I was like very happy with actually. I thought that was a really great collaboration. Um, yeah, it must have been the We Share Fest we met the first time. I think you're right.
Yeah, I think actually it was an online call where we met around then. And then we went to Open Co-op, right? Which was also
That's
a really
it.
interesting
Yeah, yeah,
event
yeah,
in
yeah.
London,
Yes.
which was bringing together sort of the whole, like, I guess, yeah, open source, cooperative, social entrepreneurship communities in the UK,
Yes.
especially. So yeah, I
Yeah.
remember meeting up there in
Yeah,
person.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how would you describe this paper that we did? Um, like, yeah, what's your
So
synthesis of what that was focused on?
so in at the core of blockchain, your blockchain has a consensus protocol, right? And uh and this was kind of very much some of the focus of, my theoretical thinking at the time was I was trying to understand what is the type of consensus that gets generated via, through blockchains. And more importantly, you know, what is getting sidelined or ignored when you generate that form of consensus. And I was working through, I was reading Chantal Mouffe at the time, and she's a political theorist, and she had a kind of definition of what the political was, and her focus, the focus of her political thinking is very much on this concept of dissensus. So the ability to disagree fundamentally, and then that politics is the specific methods that disagreements between people get worked out. That's a super simplified understanding of her theory, but I'm, trying to keep it simple. Um, and so I was thinking through a lot of this stuff, and um, there had been this big hack in the Ethereum ecosystem called it was this infamous DAO. So this was the first time that this concept of a decentralized autonomous organization was being tested out in real life. It had blown up to something much bigger than people expected, and you had this smart contract on a blockchain that was holding millions and millions of dollars worth of Ethereum, and there was a hack on that DAO contract that started siphoning off funds. And that caused a big disagreement in the community. And this was a kind of moment of like big rupture and big dissensus in that community. And so I got interested in kind of, DAOs and how they kind of like fall apart, but also how they try and repair things and how, effectively dissensus is managed in the DAO context.
Mhm.
Um, and both you and Kate Beecroft had been working practically with a bunch of DAO projects. And so I was very, very keen to collaborate on that piece because I just had the kind of like theoretical knowledge and it was very much kind of as an outsider, let's say. Yeah, so I was keen to kind of like think through a lot of those themes and those topics with you guys. And I think it turned out to be a really good piece. It was called the Dissensus Protocol, right?
Yeah.
So instead of consensus, a dissensus protocol, and I thought that was quite cute. And I think the piece overall was actually pretty rigorous, and quite nice. So quite nicely done.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was also quite happy with it. And I remember that we even had an example, a case study from the WeShare community in there as well
Yes.
about dissensus. And like,
Yes.
yeah, I thought it was really great to be able to bring in some like tangible real life examples of how community were doing this, not even just in the Web3 space, but like really, yeah, how to navigate that disagreement basically.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah. Very, very interesting. In any case, I always really appreciated having the chance to co-write a paper, even though I've not had a very long academic career. So yeah, I think that was sort of the last time that we really connected, and so I'm really glad to now, I guess, take a bit of a moment to reflect and take stock on how things have evolved. Especially if we look at like the blockchain and the Web3 space, but generally also like our hopes and dreams for how technology and different innovations might actually help us yeah change the world or address some of the big challenges that we have. Like how is that how are you feeling now in terms of, if you think about Jaya 10 years ago and what you thought might be possible and how things have actually evolved, and also yeah, thinking about the next wave of technology that's already coming right now, and maybe patterns we're seeing repeat.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I don't want to sound too arrogant, but I have to say that all the problems that I was kind of noticing early days in the blockchain space, um, they turned out to be true. Like, the critique like played out exactly as we unfortunately expected that it would. And I do fear that the same will be the case in a lot of ways for AI as the new kind of hype wave. So I think if there's one lesson that, I'd take away, it is to be, much more confident in that critique, and not necessarily as a critique in order to, completely dismantle something, but a critique in order to point to other development pathways for a piece of tech, right? Um,
Can you say a
I
little bit more about like what was that critique that you had that you feel like
Yeah.
actually
Well,
played
I mean,
out?
in a very blunt way. I mean, I read David Columbia's book quite early on of, Bitcoin as extreme right-wing politics,
Mm.
which, I have this kind of, at the time, I was like, I agree with everything he's saying, but it feels like half the story. It feels like it's not capturing just how messy the Bitcoin ecosystem really is, and that there's so much more going on there and so many more influences.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately today, like we see what's going on with Trump and how close he's been with the Bitcoin community. I mean, now, of course, the tariffs in the past couple of days tanked the market and everyone's, annoyed and pissed off. But Trump, really did kind of adopt that community in many ways. And the far right has grown in tandem with a lot of the crypto space and been fueled by it. And so there was a lot of truth to Columbia's book, I think, but I'm also weirdly, my position is still the same as it was ten years ago, that like there might have been, because I was thinking this through with another friend the other day, there might have the problem with Columbia's book is that it might have resulted in the ceding of space to the right wing in that debate. So like any progressives or people on the left immediately just kind of like detached and said, this is not for me. And it was kind of always going to be that way because, the topic of money is something that, apart from a kind of handful of social currency activists, is something that, for money, finance, and technology, the left hasn't actually fully, like lately in the past like couple decades, has definitely stepped away from those topics and isn't really taking the leadership in those areas. It's kind of very much ceded to kind of hyper financialized uh, capital, basically. And so it becomes a target of left critique rather than a space that the left occupies, or that any progressive influences occupy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, that might be a second lesson also to really think about is like, yes, be confident in the critique, like 1,000% confident in the critique, go all the way. But also take that extra step because we can't afford to stay just in the critique, anymore. I mean, we couldn't back then, but we most definitely cannot now. So it's also very much about, go all the way in the critique and then take that extra step and claim that space and be like, this is what should happen.
Yeah.
We're going in this direction instead, right?
Yeah.
And take that leadership. And that's something that, maybe, I don't know, it's not exactly a regret, but I guess like if I was to say something to my younger self, that's what I would say, right? It's like, you're good, you're good. Just go further, go stronger, go louder, go bigger. You got
Mm.
this, just go all the way. Don't hold back.
Yeah. Got
And
some
there
very good
has
wisdom there.
yeah.
I hear
And
you.
yeah, I mean there has been individuals that have managed to do that, and there's definitely people in the AI space that are doing that, and it's so wonderful to see. I think we've got some incredible voices there.
Mm.
Yeah, so, um, let's see if those voices can, because it is also so much about just grabbing that capital. I mean, so that's okay. That's maybe the third lesson or the
Uh-huh.
third critique from back then, right? Was like,
Yeah.
I studied political economy before moving into like geography, which was my academic discipline at the time. And so I'd read a bunch of Hayek, and I find Hayek very fun to read because it's intellectually stimulating, right? He's a right-wing economist from Austria. He's like the godfather of kind of market economics. And the thinking there really is that markets is a form of higher intelligence for organizing societies. And that the work of politics and policy making is to get people out of the way and let the market and the price mechanism do its trick, right? Which, still manages to get a lot of people excited when they read it on paper, despite how absolutely destructive and violent and ineffective it's been in the real world. Because like the effectively the implications are, to put it very, very crudely, you remove agency and intelligence from people, and then you place it with the market, and you support the market as much as you possibly can. And it is the dumbest thing. And you see that play out over and over again in the crypto space, right? Is that like everything is done through economic incentives.
Hmm.
And so, even the concept of community is captured via incentives. So it's like every little thing, it's like this tweet, share this blog post, translate this thing, everything comes with a little financial reward of that kind of like token, and you're effectively
Everything's
paying,
tokenized.
everything
Yeah.
is tokenized, and you're paying people in lottery tickets to do like minuscule things, and then you're calling it community, right? So what is the glue holding this community together? It is, self-interested, speculative economics that, isn't even the financial economy, which has some, vague anchoring in a real economy in some way. It's a total speculative,
Mm.
like vibes economy, effectively. That's like, and that vibes economy, we can see how easy it is for like Musk and Trump to manipulate the normal financial markets, right? But when it comes to crypto markets, they're so much easier to manipulate, exactly because it's pure vibes, right? And when you
Mm.
have like such, big concentrations of wealth in the hands of whales, and even more so. So yeah, it's kind of like, so the critique of Hayek kind of, you know, is fully valid in the crypto space, and maybe like even like triple E valid. And you add to that all the critique of financialized economies and so on. And you get effectively like really dumb money. And you get dumb money at a time that is so critical. I mean, we need smart money right now,
Yeah.
and really need smart money. And smart money meaning like money that goes to the things that really desperately need radical and deep transformation. And that's especially also in the technological realm, due to the climate crisis and everything like that. And the incredible amounts of refugees that we've got at the moment. Like there's some like really, really major practical problems. And instead, you get Trump and Melania coin, and everyone's like, it's like, yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's a
that
real
rant
cognitive
over.
dissonance to see that happening.
Yeah,
Yeah, for there to
yeah.
be such an imbalance of like where all this money is flowing and what actually are the big issues that really need it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so this idea that markets organize societies rationally, well, it wasn't true it wasn't even true when we're talking about a real economy. And then it was
Yeah.
even less true when we're talking about a financialized economy. And then when we're talking about crypto economy, it's absolutely not true because it's totally untethered
Yeah.
from the real world. That's not to say that these things can't be transformative for individuals. Of course they can. And it's not to say that it can't be a space of like, you know, fun and innovation and people trying out crazy things. And there's a part of me that really enjoys that. And I think that is still the fun part of crypto.
Yeah.
Um, but uh there's something, it almost also feels like, and I think the same is true with AI, really. It's like, let's get real about what this is and cut the bullshit. Because then
Hmm.
we can, really, innovate in a way that makes sense and is like scientifically true, and not just like a kind of weird marketing
Hmm.
spin. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for me, one of the parts that I think has created a lot of confusion there is also that I feel like there's sometimes this idea that money goes where there's real value,
Yeah.
and that's not really true
No, not
all
at
the
all.
time.
Not at
So
all.
just because there's all this money in that space, that does not mean that there's actually like real world things being done, right? Not to say that
Absolutely
there
not.
are some, but like, yeah, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors. And I think, yeah, I feel like I'm sure you've seen this in even more like detail of how many projects there were that were maybe more representing the left, right, or progressive ideas, and that were maybe a bit like utopian or ideological about how they were gonna, yeah, change society, and that like most of those have disappeared.
Yeah. Oh,
So like, are there
definitely. I
any?
mean, I'd say that, and it's the same with Nym, right? It's like we have a token, and
Yeah,
we're trying to create a kind of real economy,
yeah,
which is like, we have an actual service,
yeah.
that is solving a problem, and the token is sustaining that. And I mean, our token struggles, right? Because really, tokens live off of, and that's also kind of like something that I'm trying to kind of to think through at a deeper level, which is what is it that tokens can do,
Hmm.
that is different? And this is exactly where it's different, is that tokens are fundamentally very cultural. It is about the
Hmm.
meme. It is about the kind of like the yeah, the kind of the jokes and the, I don't know, like various hype cycles and stuff like that. It's not rational. And I think we have tried to make it too rational in a sense,
Yeah.
where it's like, well, maybe there's other vehicles that are better for a rational, trying to establish a rational economy. we're still playing around with that. Either that or we just need to
Yeah.
get loosen up a bit. Who knows? But yeah. But it is, I
Mm.
mean, like you say, there is something strange around like the projects that took this thing seriously were the ones that failed, and the ones that kind of just get a little bit like, you know, that just, I don't know, a drawing of a bored ape. And it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's I think it's an interesting phenomenon that points to the specific characters of this medium. It's not like money. It doesn't do the same thing as money does, and
Mm.
it doesn't have to do with rational economics in that way.
Yeah.
It's a cultural factor, and so that's also why I've always felt that the art world, looking at the art world, is much more informative for how to understand, um, crypto economics as they play out in the real world than traditional economic disciplines. Because the art world, you have these big fluctuations in prices and value and whatever else. But anyway, that's a side topic.
Okay, okay, yeah, interesting. Because it's like basically there's this extreme subjectivity in the art world, right?
Exactly.
About what is valuable and that you have a
Exactly.
similar dynamic. Okay, that
Exactly.
makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So there's like because economics assumes that you can, that there's a rational price for something and that
Yeah,
rational price has to do with utility.
yeah,
There's that a little bit that underlying assumption. But when
yes,
it comes to culture and art, you can't put a price on things
yeah,
because it's totally subjective. And that's
yeah,
exactly where you see these big kind of, massive fluctuations of price. Like maybe it's worth less, or maybe it's worth billions. You know what I mean? It's like
yeah, yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
kind of yeah.
That's
So
a very good parallel.
yeah,
That definitely makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
So I'm really curious, I guess trying to move a little bit more to like your own personal journey.
yeah,
And I guess despite all of these critiques that have played out, and I guess some disillusionment there, or like recalibrating of what's really possible here, um, why have you chosen to still like what is the spark that is still keeping you to be working in this space, even though in a much more selective manner? And then maybe after that we can go a little bit further and talk more about like your leadership
yeah.
journey.
Um, so when I was writing, oops, sorry, hang on. When I was writing and thinking about blockchain technology and politics and the relationship between humans and technology and how technology changes society and so on, uh I was kind of, I guess, always consciously or subconsciously and eventually very consciously positioning myself as like the critical insider when I was like in blockchain spaces, and then outside of blockchain spaces, I was the one that was always trying to like advocate for people to look a little deeper and try and get
Mm,
involved and try and get a bit messy with this thing. Um, And I think that's, yeah, like I mentioned earlier, that's still kind of where I stand. But so for me, I wanted to step out of academia for a minute and actually get my hands messy. And there was, like I mentioned earlier, there was, the key thing about blockchain is the kind of decentralized claim, right? That it's a decentralized technology fundamentally, and so the question is like, where does a decentralized network really make sense? And in the specific Nym use case, it made sense not just as a kind of like speculative marketing ploy to say like, yo, we're totally decentralized, come buy our token, but it made sense deeply in the use case that the tech was
mhm,
trying to solve, and it was trying to solve a real use case that I believe strongly in. And it speaks a little bit to the kind of like AI stuff that's happening too. So for me, my motivations are fundamentally political at the end of the day. And so whether I'm working in tech or the arts or in academia, it doesn't actually matter. It's like the red thread for me
mm,
is the political. And so um, Nym, is a strong piece of privacy software, and it felt to me like the right move to make in a kind of digital, political, and economic context where surveillance had become such a fundamental part of not just the kind of technical architecture of the internet, but also the business model.
Mhm.
So it kind of brought together a number of questions that I was very interested in. It's like, okay, so we're at a historic, at the time we're at a historical moment where, the internet primarily is run on a kind of data economy. That data economy is highly involuntary, meaning it's effectively surveillance, is grabbing data from people, scraping data off of websites. Um, and that's propping up the whole kind of like economics of the internet, and is also the fuel that has, kickstarted the AI industry, and kickstarted the AI industry in an incredibly centralized fashion, right? So it's been this massive theft, effectively,
Mhm.
of
Yeah.
from the whole world, right? You
Yes.
have a global network, people all over the world, and collaborating and putting up content and all this stuff for like several decades, and it just gets stolen, outright stolen. Um,
Yes.
so for me, like being involved in the kind of privacy tech space is like almost, it's a kind of, in my head, it's a very traditional blockade. It's like you're literally creating a blockade in the data
Mm.
economy,
Yeah.
and doing that at a very deep level, at the technical level. So it's not like trying to tell people, no, please don't do this or whatever. It's not like a kind of trying to claim back, some ownership or autonomy after the fact. It's like blocking it before it even happens. It's like, no, this, when you send traffic across the internet, it should not produce intelligence for other people. It should not be something that someone can watch and take advantage of. Um, it should be your business
Mm.
entirely, and it should be totally up to you to decide when you want to share something with people.
Yeah.
Um, and that should be a fundamental fact of everybody's life, like a precondition, really, for everyone's life, is that you have that level of autonomy that you can decide yourself who you want to share things with, about your life, your state of mind, your relationships, this sort of thing. It should not be just open for anyone to exploit. So that was my motivation, both to kind of like get my hands messy on the blockchain space, but also it's specifically it's this, political intervention into the technical space it's a technical intervention, but it's an intervention into economics and politics as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And I really love how you brought in that image of the blockade because that's like an activist tool, right?
Yeah.
Like the physical blockade. And I guess that also connects quite strongly with I think like one of your roots, right? Like you had sort of described to me that you have a bit of a like I guess you see yourself as an anarchist or have an anarchist past, right?
Yeah.
um so yeah, I was thinking back to this conversation that we had a few months ago where you were talking a bit about how it's sort of interesting now having ended up in a leadership role uh in the organization you're in, but like with these anarchist roots and like what that brings up and how do you navigate that and how do you sort of yeah, I guess stay true to some of those principles and values that you have while also having this leadership role in a startup.
Yeah.
So yeah, since leadership is a really important topic in everything that I work on and that Greater Than does, I'd be really curious to see more how are you navigating those different energies and like yeah, how does that work for you?
Yeah. I I mean, I would, I joined Nym, and then after not very long, yeah, ended up becoming a manager effectively and taking this position in the leadership team. And uh yeah, I guess like my organizational background has been much more, yeah, either kind of just doing my own thing or working in very horizontal organizations. It's also worth saying that the horizontal organizations that I've worked in, also ended up quite dysfunctional. So there's like a lot of lessons that also come from that. But I mean, yes, I do see myself as an anarchist, absolutely. But the way that I understand anarchism, um, is not like that you're kind of against leadership. It is that it's a kind of different quality to leadership and a different quality to how you understand humans and what it means to lead and what it means to manage, um, than might kind of traditionally be the case. And so what I mean by that is like, for me, what's core about anarchist thinking is that you value things fully in what they are and who they are. So a human being is a full human being. They're not a resource, right? And that's kind of just in reference to specific management speak, right? Where it's like, we need to add a resource here in order to achieve this thing. And you see humans just as a kind of input in order to produce an output. That's absolutely not the case, for me. And I think uh, there is something that runs quite deep there, which is to say that when you view humans as a kind of like a full human being, your job as a manager, like the only thing your job is, or as a leader, is to kind of create the best circumstances possible for that person to become the best version of who they are and fully who they are. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also kind of you have that fundamental belief that people have innate qualities that make them, geniuses in their own right. If you're able to generate and foster and create the proper environment for that to happen. So that's how I see my role as a leader is literally just, to kind of understand my team, understand their qualities, and understand their qualities fully as human beings, um, to get the best out of them, really. And I think that's kind of, um, uh, yeah, that's like at the end of the day where you get the best, where you get the best results also.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's also something that can kind of be very challenging to do in practice because it kind of it really clashes with like how to put it, like organizational paranoias that otherwise come in, right? So what is the kind of conflict here organizationally, right? There is like as organizations grow, you have the kind of fear of losing control or not getting the outputs that you want or whatever. And that fear and that paranoia make you want to tighten the kind of like structures, right? And you want to tighten the structures in this way where it's like, okay, um, you want objective measurements and you want the KPIs to be right and you want all the kind of mechanisms that will reduce your anxiety around the kind of output. So you want the output to be what you expect it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all these technologies that are developed in, management practices to try and kind of like achieve that and squeeze that out of people. Um, and so I'm trying to inhabit that, which definitely also exists within Nym. And there are, some merits to some of those techniques,
Mm-hmm.
fine. And I'm trying to understand and work with those and see what their merit is. Um, and there are some, I mean, the merits are like, their accountability. The merits are, some people like to know what's expected of them. So sometimes those structures can help make people feel more safe in an organization. So I find that quite interesting. But you also don't want to lose sight of the real human beings within that structure, because that's, if you lose sight of that, then you're basically like wasting people. Because you press people into a structure that effectively produces burnout. I mean, that's literally what happens. So
Yeah.
yeah, so these are some of the things that are kind of like that have been on my mind. I'm I'm working, also personally within this concept of conscious leadership, which is a kind
Mm-hmm.
of program in its own right, and doing some coaching there, that has to do a lot with this kind of like, yeah, fostering the innate genius of people and building that trust, which is a very, very deep trust that like if you do that, good outcomes will come of their own. You don't need that extra kind of fear and control. It's like you need to create the circumstances and then allow for, things to emerge. Um, I mean, I think
Yeah, and that trust really is essential, isn't it?
it's so
As a
essential.
foundation. And I think
Yeah.
like a lot of more standard management practices are often based on an assumption of mistrust,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Um, that's not
exactly.
a trivial thing to change the dynamic around.
No, it isn't. And it's so, when you think it through, it's like so painful and so like disturbing that that is the foundation of the relationships that make up the vast majority of the hours of our days, right? Our working relationships. where there is that kind of like a foundation of mistrust,
Mm.
and where control comes in, and where also the natural outcome of that is in many ways also a lack of consent, really. It ends up becoming a forced relationship where people feel like they have to work and they have to kind of, in order to survive. And then you have, stressors in society in a way that's like it's leading directly to unfreedom rather than freedom.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
also doesn't get the best out of people. It wastes people. So like at Nym, there's a couple, there's a lot of interesting dynamics going on. Like first of all, it's a company it's very mission driven. So people who work there are highly motivated. They really want to be there. And they want to put all their best effort into working there. Um, and then we have this kind of like crazy mix of a couple of anarchists in the founding team, but actually also a very corporate structure because there is also this kind of like fear and paranoia. There is also a kind of um, it's also a distributed company, so it's like, we don't get to spend a whole lot of time in person. And so a lot of these like dynamics play in, and it's a very interesting context to try and build up that sort of trust and try and kind of like set the circumstances for people to be the best versions of themselves, be creative, help each other solve problems, that sort of thing.
Mm.
But yeah, the other thing that I
Yeah.
wanted to mention on leadership specifically,
Hmm.
sorry, did you want to come in there? I did before I.
Oh, there was just one sort of anecdote that was popping up for me, that someone recently shared with me, just about the topic of consent, because so in Greater Than we often frame the heart of this work right around moving from like dominance to partnership
Yeah,
dynamic. But I think what's really interesting is and this anecdote that someone shared with me who works a lot in sort of self-managing businesses is that he said his mission in life was to move away from there being of unconsented relationships of dominance.
yeah,
Because, of course, there might be situations where people say, hey, I want you to be dominant. And that's okay. Right.
exactly.
The essence is I consent to it. And at any time I can say, hey, guess what? I want to change that.
Yeah,
Let's do it differently. And I
yeah,
think that's just a really interesting way to framing that.
yeah. No, it is. It's very interesting and it's very productive. So being in a kind of like the dominant and then the dom sub relationship, let's say. Um,
Yeah.
when you're in the sub position, there's a lot of freedom that comes with that because you're like released from having to take care of all these things. Someone else is handling them for you.
Yeah.
You don't have to question the why or the what. You're able to just focus on, a single thing or a simple thing or, so and you see that in companies also. There are people that don't want management positions. They absolutely do not want to climb any career ladder whatsoever.
Yeah. And that's
Um,
absolutely okay.
and that's totally okay. Uh, but the key thing, like you say, is around the consent and is around like, um, again, this thing of like generating the kind of best possible environment for the best to come out from people, right? And for some people, it is to kind of just get on with their day-to-day work, and for others, it's to step into leadership positions. The other thing that I like kind of thinking through or bringing into the way that I do management is, I mean, first of all, I don't particularly want to be a manager or like to be a manager. So my practice, which I also kind of fold into the kind of anarchist thinking, is like the more I can support my team to become leaders in their own right, the less I have to uh, do that management work, and the more I can get on with my work, right? So it's also around like empowering others. And there is this, I think David Graeber, I think, had this example um, around, he was particularly interested in leadership positions that kind of have built into um, their foundations, their own kind of negation. So the example that he uses is a teacher. And he's like, if you're a really, really good teacher, and you teach really, really well, then you're kind of undermining your own power, right? Because it's like you no longer become the holder of that knowledge, like that knowledge is now spread to others and you've empowered them. And so there is that kind of like negation, that kind of like
Yeah.
beautiful cycle almost. So that mental model I like to work with as well, which is like how to
It's
incorporate
making
that.
yourself obsolete, right?
Exactly.
Working towards that. Yeah.
And there's so much uh, I mean, in a contradictory way, power in that. Because fundamentally, I think a lot of people, especially today, really long for being in a context where their unique qualities can contribute in a positive way. And so if someone empowers them to do that, that builds a really strong relationship with that person. Uh, and I think that's kind of what we're trying to achieve, right? Is really that kind of the ability for people to kind of yeah, fully step into their own power and then also for that power to be organized in a way that has a really positive output and outcome. I think
Mm.
that's a very satisfying position for anybody to be in.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's kind of like those are the mental models, right? And of course, the
Hmm.
day-to-day gets a lot more messy and it doesn't always play out that way. And I'm sure if my team listens to this podcast, they'll be like, okay, sure, Jaya, you know what I mean? But it's like, that's the kind of, mm, that's the philosophy, I guess. And then, that I'm trying to kind of enact and work with in my day-to-day. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's very inspiring. And it also, I think it resonates a lot with what often is labeled as like teal organizations or, yeah, self-managing approaches for those people that connect it with that. There's obviously a lot of different ways that people, I think, enter this sort of servant leadership dynamic.
Mm.
But yeah, it's interesting that you connect it with anarchism because I think that wouldn't have been like this idea of really allowing humans to be fully themselves and bring that in. Like, yeah, I hadn't connected it with that concept, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting to see all the different ways of looking at that.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the reason why I connected with anarchism is because uh, you know, inherent in like anarchist philosophy or even just inherent in the word like, anarchy, it's like the emphasis is not on an organizational structure. So you don't start with how are we gonna, what's the diagram? You don't start with that. What you start with is a deep trust in the innate qualities of the people and the dynamics that you have around you. And a trust that in if you can go deep enough in developing that, like structure can emerge from that, and that there is an intelligence to that structure that emerges from
Mm.
that. Um, that's not to say that it's successful every time, right? And people, their our own, mental dogmas and models always get in the way. So, and there's also, historical intelligence that's built up around the more traditional organizational structures of lessons learned and so on that I think are well worth kind of bringing to the table. So that's also
Mm.
why, I find Nym to be such a interesting space to work through some of these topics because it's such a hybrid organization. Like, because I mean, not only do you have this kind of fact of the kind of the founding team being, coming from kind of, uh, and it's really not everybody. It's like a couple people from more kind of anarchist organizing backgrounds, and then others that come from academia or traditional business. And then you have the blockchain element, right? The decentralization via technical means
Hmm.
that comes in, right? Um, and all of that stuff is kind of jostling for space right now, and it's really a testing of the merits of all of these different ways of doing things, which is, quite. It's never boring. It's like it's quite an interesting process, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that it would suit you well because there's like an intersection of lots of different things, like different, it's like a bit interdisciplinary in a way, right?
Yes.
Lots of different things
Yeah.
colliding. So we're gonna slowly start wrapping up here. Um, and I guess I'd love to reconnect with something you said a bit earlier on, where you were sort of referring to like speaking to Jaya of the past, and I would love to sort of get a sense from you, I guess, in terms of looking forward and other people that are maybe working in similar fields or related or maybe others. Like, where do you feel like we need to be putting more of our attention? Like, if there's anything that you could like direct people towards or say, hey, let's look there, or where should the focus be? I'd really love to hear like where do you think that is, or yeah, what advice do you have for those of us who are wanting to
Um,
move the needle somehow?
yeah. So, uh, I hope this answer isn't too vague, but it I feel quite strongly about the fact that you've got, a couple of dudes in the United States who's like capturing the headlines and people's mental space for, weeks now, right? Or like even like a couple of years now, or like, there's so much attention that gets sucked towards these guys. And I think, in terms of kind of attention, I'm trying to kind of maybe focus a little bit more on the immediate, right? So it's like there's a lot of value in what's happening immediately around you. And I think, and that also, it's another thing that I wanted to say around like expertise and technology and so on. I feel quite deeply that like when it comes to the very complex systems that we live in right now, both the complex economic systems, supply chains, the climate, technology, it can feel quite disempowering to, know that we have problems in these complex systems, and not feel like you're in the right position to do anything about it. Um, and I feel very, very strongly that there like all expertise is important right now. So like for
Mhm.
example, when I was studying, the blockchain protocols quite closely, like the conversations that you'll have with engineers that build the protocols, and then the conversations that you'll have with people that are using the systems or trading with a token or whatever are completely different.
Mhm.
And um they all have something to bring because they're all true and they all have merit in their own right, right? So there's like, it's understanding. I think that the important thing to pay attention to, from my perspective right now, is understanding who you are, your positionality in these systems, and how they affect you, and really pay attention, like really pay attention, because there's so much wisdom in how they affect you specifically,
Mhm.
and how you specifically are engaging with these systems, Um, like, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is, sure, there are experts that gather a lot of information and that have something important to say on tech and economics and finance and climate. Um, but I would say most people are feeling the effects of these on their own bodies, in their local communities, in their, in their workplaces. And there's a lot of intelligence there that I think can come to the
Mhm.
surface. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a really great message of, yeah, I guess everyone to be aware of their like the value and power of their own perspective,
Yeah.
what's going on, and like what that then allows each of us to do from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Mm,
Um,
great.
yeah. I'm trying to think. I feel like that was very vague. I'm trying to think if there's a way to make it more like specific, concrete, like an example. But yeah, I mean, even like phone addiction, right? It's like, what is your experience? Like, how is it affecting your mental process? How is it affecting your social relationships that you're using this app or that app, or, et cetera? Like all that stuff is like, it's real. This is, yeah, it has value.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jaya. I don't know if you have any final words or anything important you still want to bring in, and then otherwise we'll close it.
No, just thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of the series. And yeah.
Great. Well, I'm looking forward to continuing to follow how all of these different projects evolve, and yeah, how Nym also continues to balance all these different energies of, yeah, anarchism and structure and very ambitious yeah, technology developments. Really
Yeah.
great to have you, and yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Ciao.
Bye.